Hello again, everyone. It's been a little while since I did my last video where I first introduced the twin-turbo Land Rover Discovery Ute that I'm building, and I thought that probably has been enough progress to shoot another quick video. Well, I don't quite know how short this is going to be, but we shall see. Last time I shot a video, I had my test engine on this temporary test stand, which, as you can now see over there, is now completely empty. I've now taken the engine out and put it into the car to take the process to the next step, and I was going to just give a quick tour to see what's been happening. All my updates have been on the AULRO forum, but sometimes shooting a quick video just does a nice little summary. So I hope you enjoy the clip. I'm not going to be doing the YouTube anti-shake feature this time, because last time there was all sorts of weird things happening in the background which almost makes you feel sick, but hopefully I'll hold the camera steady enough this time and you won't need to resort to that. Anyway, I'll show you what I've been doing. So this is where most of the action has been, in the engine bay of the Discovery. I haven't really changed anything else from the last video with regards to the bull bar or anything like that. It's all really been right here in the engine bay. And if you look back to my other, probably quite badly shot video, you'll see where I've gone and described all the various bits and pieces that I've fitted onto this engine. Now, I know that this engine is a bit grotty, but despite all the effort that I've gone to putting this engine into the car, I am actually going to have to rip it out again and change the engine over to my new one, which I've actually got sitting in the other part of the workshop. So that's my newly built engine with 4-bolt mains and T-hat liners, but I don't want to do any testing on that engine, so I've thrown in an old engine which I couldn't really give a damn about until I get the tuning about right, and then I'll swap it out. So quite a bit more work left. By the way, in case you're wondering why there's so many birds, it's because I'm essentially in a shed, and I've got a, hopefully you'll be able to hear past all the screeching little baby birds that are begging for some food. Anyway, so as I mentioned before, this is the top mount intercooler. I've actually had a few people in a few forums say that it's pretty much the worst place you could mount a intercooler. Yes, I am aware of that. Ideally, you put these things on the front of the car. Because this is a four-wheel drive and it's going to get pretty muddy, and I didn't want to compromise the amount of air that goes through the radiator, so I decided to put the intercooler on the top. I have got heat shims inside there, which I made. There's one in there, and I've got to install another one a bit further down when I do the proper engine installation. And I will be ducting these electric fans through the bonnet with a scoop. So I've got to cut a pretty massive hole in the bonnet to fit all this in, and then I've got a lot of fiberglassing to do to make it all look nice and neat. Overall, I think it's probably going to look like a pretty aggressive machine when I've got the intercooler all done. But the main thing I've been doing over the last quite a number of weeks is doing all of this stainless steel ducting all around the engine to connect the turbos. It was actually quite tricky, as well as mounting, the evaporator. I had to plumb up, and this is all temporary plumbing. I'd like to do that later in some stainless steel pipe, but I've had to plumb up the cooling lines onto the turbos. I've had to make up this return line into the coolant system from the turbo cooling. And do basically all the wiring. So I've had to run the loom to, for example, the idle control valve. I've got my boost control solenoid sitting over here, the power to run to the fans and the intake air temperature, and all the wiring for, you can see under there, the LPG vapor injectors, the coil packs, etc., etc. So a fair bit of cabling is running around this engine bay. Here's a bit of an example of some of the rather tricky ducting that I've had to weld up. as well as learning how to weld stainless steel pipe, which I've sort of gotten the hang of, but the outlet of the turbo is down there, runs underneath the brake master. It's getting a little dark. And running over into the throttle body and then into the intercooler and off to the engine. So overall, it's all really, really squishy. It's going to be a nightmare to do any sort of maintenance on this car. As it is, I had a lot of fun trying to get to a bolt, which I couldn't even get the camera into. See that bolt right there? Sorry, that nut right in the middle, under the intercooler. That's a pain in the ass to get to. I've got to stick my hand sort of. Sorry about that. I bumped the stop button on the phone, but as I was saying, it's a real pain to get your hand in there to tighten up that nut. But I got there in the end, and I'm just going to have to live with it. So a couple of other things that I've done. I'm using the original Discovery coolant bottle on the car. Air filters. I really would have liked to have used some nice modern vehicle plastic air filters, but I couldn't really find anything that would suit for a dual intake engine, so I ended up going for some of the older Land Rover metal cylindrical filter boxes, and I welded up some various parts. So the intake was the outlet was much larger than what I needed, so I needed to put a little bit of a conical reducer. And I've shown how I did all that on the forum, so if you're interested in all of that, you'll see that there. These flexible joints I need to do a bit of work with. I couldn't find anything that was 2-inch. They're a bit too big, but at least for now, they serve the purpose. And I need to obviously finish, so I've only gotten up to here, but the next thing is for me to run the ducting with more 2-inch stainless steel pipe through here, then turn the elbow, transition into 3-inch, go through, and then have the snorkel. I'll have one snorkel on either side. This car had a snorkel on that side, so the hole's already been made, but the same thing. I'll run the same arrangement on both sides of the car. A little bit more of some of the wiring. Ignore that bit of messiness up in there. I haven't finished the location of the wideband oxygen sensor in the exhaust system. I'll have to do that when the final exhaust is put in place, but there's the ignition module. It's an EDIS-8. Plenty of information about that available on the internet. If you remember, on that side of the engine I showed the coolant lines running into the turbo. Naturally, because I've got two turbos, I'm running coolant lines to both of them. You can see the other one for the right hand side turbo running through there. One thing I realized is that I think most people run coolant lines to turbos from the takeoff point of the heater, the cabin heater. I realized that the way that the cabin heater is plumbed, it actually takes the hot water or the hot coolant out of the engine, would send it through the turbo and heat it up even more, and then send it to the intake of the engine coolant pump and send it back through the engine. Now, Land Rovers, or the Land Rover V8, because it's an aluminium block, they're fairly notorious for being getting a bit too hot. And if they get too hot, you have all sorts of problems with them. Hence why you need to go to the T-hat liners and all that sort of stuff. But what I decided was, rather than taking off the coolant lines for the turbos off the engine, that I'll run a parallel cooling circuit. So what I've done, by the way, that's a blow-off valve. I'm not particularly happy with the position of it, but not much I can do. It's getting a bit crowded in here, so it's not going to stay there. But anyway, underneath here is an electric coolant pump, which I have plumbed in upstream of the main motor water pump. So what it does is it takes the coolant from the discharge of the radiator, draws it through the pump, and then it sends it through the turbos in parallel. And then once it's gone through both turbos, it then joins in the discharge of the engine to go through the radiator. So I've got essentially two parallel cooling circuits on this engine. I've done that purely because I didn't want to send the hot water, or the hot coolant, from the turbos into the engine, because in my mind it'll be a lot harder for it to be regulated, and well, overall it just didn't seem like it made much sense to me. So another degree of complexity that I went and added on myself, but I think it'll work. There's no reason why it wouldn't. I'm still yet to decide if I'm particularly happy with the way I've done the plumbing. It runs under the Brake Master booster there. Ideally, if I have some more time. And keep in mind that I've been working on this project for about 6 years, that I'd like to run that piping in either stainless steel or something like that, but holy moly, it's a lot more work. Again, I'm not happy with those lines running to the LPG evaporator. They look ugly. I'm fighting a bit of a battle here with the phone, so this is why the video is in a number of takes. For one, it complains it's getting a bit too hot. It's a rather warm day today. I'm a little bit sweaty, as you can see. Or it complains it hasn't got enough storage space, so bear with me as I limp my way through the rest of this video, but hopefully it'll be done soon. Where was I? Let's see if we can get this one done in one take. Something that looks rather ugly is this throttle linkage that I put together. Here's the original, rather perished. That'll be worked on later. Please ignore that. Pretend you did not see that. Anyway, this is the throttle linkage that I put together to connect the accelerator pedal to the throttles on either side, plus the gearbox kickdown cable on the middle there. It looks a bit ordinary because it is basically a mock-up. I just welded it up out of bits and pieces just to get it working, and I'll get those pieces laser cut and folded up nicely. There's a linear bearing in there, and all these little bits you can sort of buy on eBay, which worked out quite nicely. One thing that was a bit difficult to find were these cable cleats, but I eventually found some, and they were perfect, because I had cut this off the hole in Astra in a wrecker, and I needed to re-terminate them to the length that I wanted. Anyway, one of the things that I did was that because the engine is so busy on either side, everything's really cluttered, I actually drilled out, it's probably better to show you on this side, I drilled out all the tack welds for these panels. They're actually sitting over there. And the plan is for me to then replace them with bolts when I'm finished to cover this all up again. But the huge benefit is that I have decent access to the side of the engine, even when it's in the car, so I can get in here and access bolts and do up all these things from the side of the wheel well, which is a massive benefit. By the way, here's the, I don't think I've done this in the last video yet, but here's the raised spring perch that I had done. So the original shock tower just sits on top of that, and all that is a 50mm plate just to give me a bit more spring to have available for additional flex. Right, I'm just going to jump over to the other side now and quickly show you something I've done with the oil lines. Okay, so this is the right side of the vehicle. One thing you'll probably notice is these lines that are here. I've mounted an external oil cooler onto the engine. The Serpentine Rover V8s have got the takeoff points for it. So with the pipe bender that I've got, I've sort of bent all this 1/2-inch steel pipe, and I've sent it right to the back of the car, and I've used some of these aluminium hose fittings with the AN fittings on that, so that basically comes from the pump, goes to the cooler, and it returns from the cooler and heads into the oil filter. It's not particularly pretty. Remember, this is a temporary engine, but you can see the plumbing under there. I just basically cut and shut existing pieces of pipe that were already on the engine, and it seems to all work reasonably well. Yeah, it was a really tricky arrangement to to fold up this pipe. As you can see, it's all very tight in there. Get it behind the spring mount, to get it around and onto that point, and to actually be able to put it into the car without ripping off the body. So thankfully, I was able to slip them in and run all the way to the back of the car. So I'll show you the remote coolers shortly. Oh, by the way, I've also done the same thing for the transmission oil cooler. You'll see that in a moment. So I think that's everything on this ugly part of the car. It's all, as you can see, when you're working on a car that's 1993, there's obviously all sorts of ugliness under here, but what can you do? It's not going to be a showpiece, but hopefully it'll go well. Right, on to the next part. Okay, so here's the engine cooler. Bought that online. They're American made. I think the Derail is the brand. Oil cooler. All over there is the transmission oil cooler. I've done it up a similar way, again using these similar fittings. And if we look under here, now this is all sort of work in progress. I've got loose cables hanging around everywhere. The lines run under here. Now I've made up this fitting to suit a temperature sensor, so that I can control when to turn on the fan, turn the fan on and off. There wasn't anything available on the internet that I could find that had these A.5" fittings and a suitable fitting on the side, so I had to make my own using a stainless steel nut, and I just welded the fittings on either side. It's a bit dark in here, but I think you can get the picture from that. Done the same thing on either side. You can see over there in the distance that I've done a very similar thing for the transmission oil cooler. Yeah, they transition to the hard line and then they go off to the engine. So interestingly, when I've had the engine idling, I can't feel any warm oil going through here. I suspect it all gets cooled down just in the steel line that gets to the back of the car. So I wonder if this cooler will ever even turn on in use, but better to be safe rather than sorry. The automatic cooler definitely does get warm, just sitting there idling in park, so that'll just be all the oil that's circling around, so that's what that is. Okay, the next part, the final bit really, in the car, the final frontier basically. I did describe what I've done here in the previous video with all the bodywork and all of that, so feel free to look at that. But here's the ECU. It's a Mega Squirt system. I found a lovely enclosure which just tucks in beautifully underneath the seat. All waterproof. These connectors were blooming expensive, but all the connections, and by the way, the box is entirely waterproof. The USB connector has got a cap so that I can seal it all up, because this being a four-wheel drive, it is very possible this is going to be underwater, so last thing I wanted was for that to be fried, because I'd be dead in the water. But here are all these connectors that run in and out of the ECU. This one here is for the manifold vacuum, very important. And I've just run the cables in under the carpet, and then they go off to the various points in the car. Overall, I think it's a pretty neat location, and fits quite well. I'm going to have to do a bit of a guard, but that's sort of something else to deal with a little bit later. So, last thing really is a quick demo of it starting, I guess. And if all goes well, I should just be able to turn the key and it'll start. Something's wrong with the USB cable, let's say, because it's not actually coming on. Who knows why that is, but if this doesn't work, we'll just ignore that, because it isn't really important. Forget it. Anyway. Fans are running, keeping the intercoolers cool. This one's running as well. I'm not sure you'll be able to hear me, but it all works reasonably nicely. One problem is there's a lot of vent. As you can see, there's actually air blowing upwards from the edge of the blade, and then it recirculates down over here, so I've got to do some sealing there in that regard, because I'm not happy about that. the pressure up through the core is a bit too high, and I will deal with that a little bit later. I just have to shim it up. But, yeah, oh, look, it's up on mine now. Quite happy with that. Quite happy. I don't know if you could hear what I was saying, but anyway, if not, feel free to ask me a question. Okay, time to finish up. Well, that's it for the update on the job. As you can see, I'm getting close to the end, but I'm not there yet. Hooray. But anyway, oh, by the way, if you're wondering what that squealing was when I started the engine, the bearings in the water pump are shot. I'm not going to deal with that for the moment. I'm just going to put up with it. But obviously, when I do put in the new engine, I'm going to ensure to deal with that. But overall, running along reasonably nicely. Just revving the engine up, the turbos start to spool up, which is perfect. So far, so good. Next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be throwing in some axles. So if you look just down there, you can see I've got on a pallet some axles that came out of another Land Rover Discovery. The rear one has got a locker in it already and some toughened axles and toughened drive flanges. The front one doesn't. I've actually got an ARB locker sitting in another axle here, so I've got to pull that out and put it in. And then throw them into the car, put some springs on it, and then so close to the end of the last shot, and then I ran out of space on the phone. So after some jiggling around and choosing what to delete, I'm back with this final streak for this video. As I was saying, the car is going to have the axles thrown on it. It's going to then need to I need to do a bit of road testing to get the ECU settled in right, get the gas installed on it properly, get a tray surface put on it, and I think that'll be about it. Then rip out the engine, put the new engine in, spray paint the car, do any bits and pieces, and at long last I'll be finished. But anyway, not there yet. Well, I hope the video was informative and you enjoyed it. I'm certainly enjoying doing the build. However, I am very keen to finish it now because it's taking way too long. And now the neighbor is starting to do some mowing, so I should wrap this up because you might not be able to hear me very well. So, until next time, if you have any questions, you can either raise any questions in the YouTube video comment section, or look me up on AULRO under the projects and tutorials section of the forum. You'll see my thread there. But until then, enjoy your day, wherever you are. Bye.